Let's bring in Jamil Jaffer, assistant professor of law at George Mason University's Scalia Law School, also former counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Department of Justice. So you hear people on Capitol Hill saying this strike was illegal. Jamil, was it?
Well, this is a complicated question, right? At least as a matter of international law, the U.S. has the ability to defend itself and protect itself as a matter of self-defense. And so the question is, has the president asserted a valid self-defense rationale here? The president said Venezuela is involved in drug trafficking into the United States, that Americans are being killed by those drugs. Primarily, he talks about fentanyl. In this case, he's talking about cocaine. And he's demonstrated information, or at least put an indictment in front of the world public that demonstrates that Nicolas Maduro and his family have been involved in the drug trade. And so the question is, will the international community accept that as a matter of international law? And as a matter of domestic law, same thing. Is Congress going to say anything about that? And if not, the president has an indictment. We've done this before, by the way, in Panama. We went into Panama. We removed the leader there of Panama for very similar charges. And nothing happened in the international community, nor domestically.
Yeah, same thing with Grenada. Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada because the government there was misbehaving. And, you know, Congress wants to be involved in all of these things, but Congress also tends to leak when information is released, does it not?
Well, that's right. So there's a separate and distinct question about whether Congress should have been notified ahead of time and given a chance to intervene or say something about it. In this case, the handwriting was on the wall. I think President Trump makes the point correctly that it was obvious to everybody the U.S. was doing something there in the region. We put a tremendous amount of forces forward. I mean, it was clear that something was going on. So you had to sort of, be inept to miss the fact that we were going to be going in at some point. But as a general matter, presidents have informed Congress ahead of time, at least letting the gang of 8 know, the speaker, the majority leader, the minority leader, and the like. In this case, it appears no congressional notification was done, and the president did take action. That happens every once in a while. There are not laws barring that necessarily. There are guidance that the president should inform Congress ahead of time. The president's now obviously informed Congress. It can obviously get in the way and stop the president and force him to remove those forces. That would take a lot of effort by Congress. We'll see if they do that. It seems unlikely at this point, though.
Well, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine under the absurd fig leaf that he was going to denazify that country. And in reality, it seems he wanted Ukraine, he wanted its resources, and maybe he wanted to prop up an illegitimate government there. On that basis, in comparison, the United States removing an indicted drug lord, basically, would seem to stand the test of international law.
Well, look, obviously the United States has taken the view that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was illegal. In this case, we have a valid indictment. I think nobody can dispute that Nicolas Maduro has been involved in the drug trade, that his family's involved in the drug trade. They've been granting the passports, as we saw in that indictment. There are a number of facts that are alleged. This indictment, by the way, has been out there since 2020. They've gotten a superseding indictment with new facts and new information, adding his son and his wife in there as well. But the indictment against Maduro has been in place for now, 5 years at least. And so everyone's known the facts and the basis under which we claim that Nicolas Maduro is involved in drug trafficking. And we've known the facts about the Cartel de las Solas, Tren de Aragua, as well as other things. And Congress hasn't stood in the way and said there's a problem here, there's an issue. Now, again, you may dispute whether the U.S. should or should not be using military force here and engaging in regime change. But in this case, he was an indicted drug dealer. The U.S. has done this before. The handwriting was on the wall. Anybody could have stepped up and passed legislation or enacted or tried to get legislation through Congress, trying to prevent the president from doing this. Congress did not do that, and the president has moved out and done this. Now the question is, what, if anything, will the U.S. or other nations do about it? And frankly, John, how will the U.S. govern Venezuela now going forward, given the president said that we're going to be in control? Not clear what he meant by that. We'll have to see how that plays out over the next few days and weeks as well.
Cuba has been getting its oil from Venezuela. They are, they're a country that doesn't have their own resources, so they got to get their energy from somewhere. It came from Venezuela. One would think that's going to be cut off if the United States is going to be taking over, essentially, the Venezuelan oil fields, or at least if they are going to get Venezuelan oil, they're going to have to pay market prices for it. This could lead to some interesting developments in Cuba as well.
Well, that's right, John. And, actually, in fact, President Trump was very clear about this at his press conference today. He made clear that the ban on Venezuelan oil remains in place until Venezuela does what the U.S. wants and meets the U.S.'s demands. Secretary Rubio also stepped up and made clear after the president responded on a question about Cuba that Cuba's on notice as well, that if they continue to behave badly in the region and do things that are counter to the U.S. interest, if see what's happened in Venezuela, it could very well happen in Cuba. Now, I don't think that's a suggestion that we're actually going to be invading Cuba or going to get their leadership out, but that was put on the table by both President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio. So we'll see how this plays out. Certainly their oil supplies will be cut off, or their oil flow will be reduced as well if, in fact, the U.S. is going to be in there and having control at some level, either influence over the government or have direct control over the petroleum supply coming out of Venezuela.
I think it's safe to say that when Nicolas Maduro went to bed last night, he didn't think he'd be rising to, U.S. forces putting him on board a helicopter and bringing him to New York for trial. Jamil Jaffer, it's good to talk to you. Thank you.